Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the God. We are the Breakfast Club. We got some special guests here.
Yes.
From the Atlanta Monster Podcast, we have Payne, Lindsey. Did I say that right?
You did. That's right.
And Donald Albright.
What's up?
Good morning, guys.
Good morning, man.
Yes, the Atlanta Monster Podcast is nominated for iHeartRadio Podcast of the Year, Best Crime
Yes, sir.
Podcast, Most Bingeable Podcast, and Breakout Podcast. What got y'all into true crime?
It's a short story. I was just sitting on my couch one day, and I didn't have a job. I was broke as hell, and I was like, hey, I just finished a Netflix true crime series, Making a Murderer. I'm sure we've all seen it.
Yep.
I was like, why am I not making one of these things right here? Because I was a filmmaker and into documentaries. I was in the music video space for a long time, and so I just started investigating a cold case in South Georgia and made a podcast. About 6 months later, a big break in the case, 2 arrests, and then it was just a storm of media, and we just kept making podcasts and kept telling stories.
Now,
How did you hook up with Donald?
We actually, so he has been in the music business for a long time.
He
and
managed people. Tell me some of the people that you managed before.
Lloyd, probably over 10 years ago, and then most recently August Alsina and a few writers, producers. You know, so I've been in the music industry over 20 years, and then we just kind of got. I was getting burnt out at the same time. He was kind of getting burnt out of making videos, and he was like, "Hey, man, I want to get into a different space. I want to do something more creative, get into the true crime space, and do a docu-series or a documentary." And I was like, man, I'm down. Like, what do I need to do? I'm coming for the ride. You know what I'm saying? At the very least. So we just put the play together, and as kind of the music thing faded out, this kind of faded up, and it just, you know, all worked out.
Well, neither one of you guys got any law enforcement background, no investigative experience. So what did y'all do? Did y'all just Google Atlanta murder cases?
We just winged it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. No, but yeah, I mean, that was one of the scariest parts going into it. I mean, some of my first calls, they were like, who's this? And I'm like, my name is Payne Lindsey. I'm doing this podcast. I mean, and now almost like 2 years later, that's actually like more acceptable now.
Yeah.
To hear, like, I mean, it doesn't make it more legit, but at least it's familiar sounding.
How open are people to speaking with you, being that when you first called, they didn't know you? And I'm sure they discussed a lot of these things in the past and then having to discuss it again. How open were they?
I mean, at first, most people are not very open about it. So, I mean, it's a sensitive subject. So, I mean, I'm approaching it with respect. So, you know, if I'm telling a story about an unsolved murder or a missing persons case, I'm just calling to ask questions, and I'm trying to help if possible. I'm trying to tell a bigger story about this person and what went wrong, and hopefully, you know, get some real publicity behind it and make a difference if possible.
Now, if they haven't heard the podcast before, is it kind of like ID where you explain what's going on? It's kind of like you reenact what's going on so people can understand?
Yeah, so Up and Vanished is kind of like you're a fly on the wall for my investigation, per se. And so I throw myself in the midst of this crazy unsolved case, and we're calling people, we're talking to people, you know, running all over the place, making interviews, and just trying to figure out, you know, what happened.
And that was the first podcast that we kind of came out the gate with, was Up and Vanished, and it was about a missing high school teacher from South Georgia. It was a cold case, cold over 10 years, and then when the podcast investigation started, it just, like, this town of 3,000 people just started talking, and, you know, the rumor mill started going. And about maybe 6 months after the podcast, less than that, a break was made in the case.
Is it because of the podcast?
I mean, it was definitely like the tip came from someone who was not only listening to the podcast, but was on our discussion board, like defending themselves and talking to different people. So it was definitely directly related to, like.
He said defending himself, so he told on himself.
Yeah, basically, or like people in that circle were telling on each other. A lot of fingers being pointed, so people felt the need to, like, defend themselves, especially in a small town. You know, I mean, it just blew up.
I guess that could possibly work better, though, because when you're making calls to these small towns, the streets always know before everybody else knows. So if you're taking the information from the streets and putting it on the podcast, now these people feel like the walls are closing in, basically.
Oh, for sure.
And
Yeah.
for people who don't trust the police, which is, I think, most people, they feel more comfortable sometimes just, you know, once they hear everyone they know in their tiny little town talking on this podcast, they'll say, okay, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to talk to them too. You know, let's lay it all out there for everyone to hear.
Yeah. Atlanta Monster too. I mean, just real quick, like, it was a different approach. The first, we knew that after doing one, like, it was huge. I mean, Up and Vanished did like over 150 million downloads in like the first year, and we knew that before we went to do another one, we wanted to do another season of Up and Vanished. We wanted to do something different. That's why we ended up doing Atlanta Monster. We wanted to get out of, like, the missing persons true crime space, and we knew we wanted to do something maybe along the lines of a serial killer. And I text Payne one day, and I was like, "Have you ever heard of the Atlanta child murders?" And he said no, and I was like, me being black, and even though I grew up in California, I'm like, man, I heard about this my whole life growing up.
I never heard about it. Break it down for me.
Really?
What is it?
So yeah, 1979 to 1981, over 30 young black African-American boys to young men went missing, and 29 of those 30 turned up murdered. And there was an outcry in the city where these mothers had to band together and really try to get any recognition that children were even missing.
They weren't even giving much press to it.
Oh no, I mean it took a year for a task force to be formed. It took over a year for FBI involvement, and it was an explosive situation because you had only black kids. All but 2 were young boys. They were being found, 2-3 weeks later, maybe months later, on the sides of roads, in ditches, and there was just no attention being paid to it. And especially, that's still a problem today. So imagine how it was in '79. So, and to make matters even more complicated, Atlanta was in a transitional period where there was the first black mayor, first black police chief. So they had this obligation to the community that elected them, but they also had an obligation to continue to move the city forward towards this convention city that would later host the Olympics and become a metropolis of the South. So it was just real crossroads, and when rumors started swirling about Klan involvement and these being racially motivated, the city was like literally about to explode, implode. So it was just an important story that was important to me. And Payne, being of a different community and younger, he didn't know anything about it, even though he grew up less than 10 miles away from where these murders were taking place. So it was just when I sent him the info, he just got inspired and felt like we need to do this.
Now, they did arrest somebody for those murders, and you guys did interview him as well.
Correct.
Yeah, Wayne Williams. He's in prison
So
still.
y'all interviewed him in prison or before he got locked up?
Just on the phone for
So y'all
months
had a
on end.
hunch? How did y'all even call the killer?
I mean, so
been-
finding him was just completely random. There was a guy that I met online who had this Facebook page about all these different conspiracy theories surrounding Wayne Williams and the Atlanta child murders. Talked to him for a few days, and then he just drops on me one day that he knows Wayne Williams personally, has known him for years, and Wayne wants to talk to me. And so that he basically just opened the door to Wayne, and for about 3 or 4 months, I just talked to Wayne almost every day.
Did you know he was the killer when you spoke to him?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Really?
So he's convicted he's convicted of two of the adult murders, but he's never been tried or convicted of any of the child
Which
murders.
is crazy.
Why?
Why would you not try this man that you are pinning all these murders on him and acting like the case is closed and over, but you never even tried him for the murders of the other children?
Yeah,
They wanted
that's
to close
where
it. They wanted to get it out of there.
That's where it
they
got
really wanted-
sketchy.
like the city of Atlanta wanted this to go away so badly.
So why are the killers calling you guys? They think they could beat you guys at what you
For
do?
sure,
like,
yeah.
Like they calling you like, hey, Payne, and are you guys ever nervous that you guys are going to get killed?
I have been before. Yes.
You've been killed before?
Yes. This is a ghost right here.
This is a
See,
ghost.
yeah. No. I mean, I've been nervous before, but it's kind of part of it. I mean, if I'm going to do this, I have to know what I'm getting myself into to a certain extent. And so, I just kind of put blinders on and, just keep going about my business. And, I believe in what I'm doing. So if someone wants to try to stop me doing that, let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Now look at the police. Let's go.
You
Let's
think that
let's take this
serial
first.
killers
Let me record this.
like attention?
I mean, for the most part, I think a lot of them do. It really just depends on their personality. I think in dealing with Wayne, who still claims his innocence, I mean, he claims he never killed anyone. FBI has definitely a different take on it, but they still don't think he's killed, all of the 30.
Right.
But if they think they're smarter than you, then they want to talk because they think they can not only convince you, but they can use you to get to your audience, and it becomes an innocence project for them, even though we set out to tell a story right down the middle and just let the listener decide.
What do you think? You think he committed all these murders?
I don't think he committed them all, but I think he committed more than he was convicted of. And I think that they just, like Payne said, that the city needed to move past this. And, they used the excuse that they didn't want to, utilize resources to try him for things that he wasn't going to get any additional time for. But what that left was a void in those families, thinking they never got justice.
Still out there.
Right. I mean,
For sure.
there's evidence there that the Klan could have been involved in some, that there could have been copycats. That, there's probably about 6 different scenarios that make up over 30 missing and murdered kids.
Yeah, because 30 is a lot even for any serial killer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
In
huge number.
2 years.
And I mean, I would assume. I think there's still a lack of like proper media coverage on this situation because I never even heard of the Atlanta child.
Wow, that's crazy. Definitely. So we're, our first podcast, Up Advantage, is getting adapted into a TV series for Oxygen, and part of that is that we want to be diverse in who we cover, and the challenge there is that when initial media coverage doesn't cover Black and brown victims, then when you go to find those cases so that we can cover them on our TV show, they're harder to find because there's no existing coverage or pre-existing coverage. So it's definitely hard. We still face it today, but I think our goal is to just tell important stories as much as we can. If they're unsolved cases, if they're unique scenarios, like in Tara's case where they're there's so many question marks, or like 5 people look guilty, 5 people couldn't have done it. So it's a challenge to figure out, weed through all that stuff and try to figure out exactly who's responsible.
How do you figure out what you're going to do next? 'Cause I'm sure now so many different families are calling with, missing kids, missing people alerts. So how do you figure what you're going to do next is the next story?
I mean, since day one, I've run this whole thing off my gut, to be honest. I mean, we have thousands and thousands of emails from people, and we respond, we talk to them. And if we're not going to make a podcast about their missing loved one, what else can we do to help in some sort of way?
Right.
Or spotlight the case somehow on our website or whatever it is. But yeah, I mean, for season 2, I went back and forth on so many different cases. Picking one just felt extremely hard to do. But I ended up covering this missing woman from Colorado, this small mountain town, middle of nowhere. And, based on my first interview, everyone was just clicking. People were talking to me. I was being connected to the people that, likely knew something, the persons of interest. And it felt just like season 1 where things were clicking and moving, and I was actually making a difference, and it was kind of giving back.
Gotcha.
Are you ever worried that you may get an innocent person in trouble, though? Because neither one of y'all are experts. You know what I'm saying? And you say you're just going off your gut. What if you interview some guys from a small town or some women from a small town, and they tell a story that's not even remotely accurate, and then fingers start getting pointed at somebody who has nothing to do with the situation?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely got to be careful. But, I'm not walking in there saying, okay, now you did it. I've never said anyone did anything, to be honest. And I couldn't arrest somebody even if I believed that they did. So I'm more or less, finding what the truth is, even if it's just a small kernel of truth, and exposing that. And usually when you do that, if it's true, then, the cards fall where they may, and, the rest is eventually exposed.
How do you know what's the truth, though?
Sources, man. I mean, you just have to verify your sources and, have at least 2 or 3 of them. Just like any other journalist would do.
Right.
Yeah, get the same story from 3 people that are
so it's
unrelated.
really just, I'm not really I'm not a detective or, something like
You're
that.
just letting people tell their story.
Yeah, I'm just a journalist.
It all revolves
if
around
anything.
storytelling.
Yeah.
Now,
it's-
how emotional was it talking to some of these parents who they still don't believe that Wayne Williams is the person that murdered their child? How emotional is it for them to feel like it's not even cared about, to find out who this true person is that murdered their kid?
It's awful. I mean, they're still in pain today. It's, terrible to see that. And I think that a lot of these families don't believe Wayne Williams killed their daughter or their little boy. And I think that's because even if Wayne did have some sort of involvement in it, it's because the law enforcement never proved it to them. They never proved that Wayne Williams did this. And so, of course, there's doubt there. Prove it,
Now, explain to the people how the podcast work. Is it a season and you do one case a season, or do you do different cases every other week? How does it work for people?
Well, that would be too quick.
Yeah, man, his head would explode if we did that. One season, one case. Usually, depending on like 12 plus episodes, it really just depends. The case kind of takes on like a shape of its own, because the style that we've done the first 2 podcasts is that we start it, and then we don't finish it until it starts to air. Because if you wrap something up, it's like a documentary. You once it's aired, people can't weigh in.
Right.
But the whole part is that, like, when people can weigh in and say, "Oh yeah, I was there," or "I never talked to the police, but I want to come forward," they're doing that because we're in a current season, and they can actually affect the next episode.
So they start hearing it, and then they're like, "Wait a minute, I want to have my 2 cents."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it becomes super meta, and people are hearing things, then connecting the dots, and it sort of takes on its own shape.
Yeah.
Are you guys doing the Zodiac Killer next?
Yeah, yeah. So season 2, Atlanta Monster, we rebranded as Monster, and now the season 2 is Zodiac Killer. And like, to go to your earlier point about, wanting attention, Zodiac is a perfect example of someone who, I mean, took responsibility for the crimes, left, ciphers and hints of so people could try to catch him. So that was someone who really felt like they wanted the spotlight.
You ever thought about doing celebrity ones? Big Pac or, one of those? We've
been approached to do a couple. There's a ton of things we want to do, especially coming with a music background and just huge fans of a lot of these guys. It's something we love to do. It's just trying to.
It's been done so much though.
Yeah, it has to be a fresh angle for Big and Pac. It has to be a fresh angle. We actually someone emailed him about R. Kelly, and I had conversations about that several months ago before I knew.
Not dead though.
No, but like it's still crime. Like true, you know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, it's though like there's a ton of things that we can do. It's just about like finding the time to really dedicate to something and doing it right. You know what I mean?
All right, well, we thank you guys for joining us, man. I look forward to listening to the podcast.
I feel like you guys might be winning this award.
Question.
Yeah.
How does the audio work? Because a lot of times when it comes to these true crime things, it's more visual. Like you mentioned, making a murderer, things like that. Like how does the audio work?
I mean, really, what we're making is an audio documentary. Mm-hmm. It's not just me walking around saying I'm here right now and doing this. It's like a real show with a real soundtrack. It's basically just stripped the visual away from it.
Do you act it out in this day? This person?
No. I mean, we just, just in a clever way infuse all the interviews together and, let it play out like it's a show.
And you
it's
guys
a show,
do like a
but it's real.
To introduce what's coming next.
Yeah. We'll have
every episode has a cliffhanger. I mean, it's a real like audio drama docuseries.
Bingeable. If you can binge like season 1 now, you can binge Atlanta Monster now, and I think the challenge is that. You have to be even more creative than if you're making a TV show or a documentary, because you can't rely on, what someone's seeing.
Visual.
But your storytelling really has to come through. We have to explain to people what you see, how you feel, what people look like. And I think the benefit is if you can connect with the audience that way, it allows their imagination to run wild. Whereas watching TV, half of it's already there for you. You know what these people look like, you know what the town looks like, instead of you just creatively getting involved in the story and creating this world in your head. So I think we make a deeper connection with the listener that way.
Are local police departments appreciative of this, or are they like, this is giving us more work because now people are putting pressure on us to reopen this case?
Especially cold cases where they were sat on.
Well, I've seen both sides of it. I mean, I would venture to say that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation probably doesn't like me that much. Because of Tara Grinstead's case and the media coverage around it, especially with the podcast, has been huge. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes that can be, annoying probably.
I'm sure.
Kind of makes it look like they didn't do their full job. Too.
Right. Oh, yeah. People, it's just sort of like a, massive exposure. But on the contrary, in Colorado, the CBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, they were just like, let's go. Let's do this. Like, we're down to try new things. We just want this thing solved.
Yeah.
No ego, no pride. Let's go.
And even Atlanta PD, they opened up like 70,000 documents to us on the Wayne Williams trial. So they were really appreciative. They were happy that someone was coming to really look into these things. And so I think it just depends. If they feel like you're stepping on their toes, and sometimes they get a little upset.
I would think private investigators would hate y'all too.
Maybe.
I don't know.
What I'm saying? Like you really are cutting into private investigators' pockets more than anybody.
I mean,
they should make podcasts.
Yeah, they definitely they have the resources. they have the information. But I think at the end of the day, everyone can work together to get really what's most important, and that's justice for these victims.
Did the Ku Klux Klan talk to you guys at all?
Well, that's an interesting story.
Not the KKK, but there was this long-running theory that this guy named Charles Sanders killed one of the boys, if not a few others as well. And so we wanted to either, dispel this theory or figure out if there's any truth to it. And so on our journey to find that, I found a guy who was best friends with Charles Sanders back in the day. He told me on record for the first time, and he was super scared. I met this guy at this small, tiny library. We went into the room, and it was like, it was tiny. We're sitting in here. It's me and him only, and we're sitting in there, and he, I got the mic on the table, press record, and he proceeds to tell me that Charles Sanders confessed to killing Luby Jeter, and which was the boy that was in question. And, basically for the first time, came out on record saying that, yeah, that is true.
Where's
it was
Charles
true.
At now?
He's dead.
Oh.
Damn.
Okay.
Wow.
Yep.
There's one.
Well, thank you guys for
And you
joining
guys are
us,
presenting
man.
at the iHeartRadio Podcast Awards.
Yeah, we'll be
also.
there at the
we'll
iHeart
be there.
Podcast Awards.
And good
presenting,
luck, man.
nominated.
You nominated for iHeart Podcast of the Year, Best Crime Podcast, Most Bingeable Podcast, and Breakout Podcast. So thank y'all for joining us and appreciate that.
Yeah, man.
Thank y'all
Thanks for having
me.
us.
Appreciate it.
Check out the Atlanta Podcast, Atlanta Monster Podcast. Thank you, Payne, Lindsey, and Donald Albright. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.